Hey, how's it going, everybody? If you're new here, welcome in. And if you've been here before, welcome back. I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And today we are talking about two OTF knives from EDC. And this is made possible by one Don Farmer of DNK Knives, who has lent me these from his personal collection. So shout out to Don, and I will go ahead and link his knife store down below. He's got a lot of great inventory, but these are not knives that are for sale. These are knives that were lent to me and they're not available. They're sold out. But I feel like they actually represent a really important talking point because they're very, very interesting. On one hand, we have the first version of the Pulse, which is made by Bestech in China. And then on the other hand, we have the USA made Pulse, and it's not even called the version 2, but to make things clear, we'll just call it the version 2. This one is made by Axial Gear here in the United States, and one of the main ways that you can tell the difference, aside from the blade shape, is by looking at that beautiful American flag on the back of this gray one. Now, they are very similar in many ways, but they're also very different, and I didn't do an unboxing on these because I wanted to actually experience these for a few days before I gave my 10 cents. And yes, that's not a mistake. I said 10 cents because, well, I've got a lot of opinions, and some of them are good and some of them are kind of showcasing room for improvement. I'm going to start off just by going over in brief detail the specs on each one, and starting with the American-made USA Pulse. This one has a blade length coming in just over 3¼ inches. We'll call it 3.3. The blade is Magna Cut, and that is, well, I mean, it's 3.3 inches of Magna Cut. It kind of reminds me a bit of the EDC Ronin, how it had that thin but also stout kind of Tanto look. And overall, we have a length of 8 inches. The pocket clip might look like it's aluminum, but it's not. The pocket clip is titanium, the button is aluminum, and then the body is this milled aluminum. Now, it is very comfortable in the hands. If you're used to an Ultratech style deployment trigger, I'm going to say that that's actually very, very similar. We have Torx hardware all around, which is great to see. I'm not a huge fan of proprietary hardware. Microtech, take note. And it's one of those knives where if you were to look at it by itself, you might actually feel like it's pretty darn good. This cost $325, which puts it in line with, well, it puts it in line with all the other American-made OTFs. Sounds good, right? Well, maybe. Before we get into that, let's talk about this guy. This is the first version. I'm going to call it the version 1. This one is made by Bestech in China. We have an aluminum body, titanium pocket clip, titanium button, and while it's also a Tanto style blade, this one is, well, it's a reverse Tanto instead of a regular Tanto. And it's, well, honestly, the parts are made in China and then they're assembled here. If you didn't know, that's how it works here in the United States for overseas OTFs. They can't actually send us a fully assembled knife. They have to send us a bucket of parts, and then it has to be assembled here. So every knife that you see that's not directly made here in the United States, that's an OTF, is actually sent here and then assembled here. So it's always got some element of USA propriety because we still have to do some of the work because of import-export laws. It is very, very similar as far as the overall length. We're looking at 7.6 inches, so it's a little bit shorter than the USA made OTF, and the blade is 3.2 inches instead of 3.3. It also features this Torx hardware. A little bit of a difference you'll see is here on the American made version, we have the EDC logo on the show side, and for the version 1 that's made by Bestech, it's here on the clip side, which I thought that was a little bit of an interesting choice. You know, that's giving me a bit of a prototype vibe. I'm not entirely sure why they decided that this was the side to put the logo on and then leave the show side clean and clear. I would have had it the other way around like we see here on the American made version, but I'm not really too bent out of shape about it either way. It's time to start talking a little bit about the differences. And I'm going to start off with this version 1. The version 1 is made by Bestech in China, and the MagnaCut, which the blade is made out of, has a HRC, an advertised HRC range of 62 to 64, which by all appearances sounds fantastic. That's the range that we want to see it in to get absolute maximum performance when it comes to wear resistance on this hollow ground edge. By contrast, this is also a MagnaCut blade, but it only has an advertised HRC of about 62. The reason why this baffles me a little bit is, for one, Bestech has been putting out MagnaCut blades recently, but those are usually coming in between 59 and 61. When it comes to these large batch manufacturers like Bestech and We, so on and so forth, it's actually really hard to get them to up their Rockwell hardness on their knives. They have a certain protocol, they stick to that because they're making batches of knives in large quantities. And I've talked to people who have OEM'd with these Chinese companies, and they tell me that it's the hardest thing in the world to get them to up their HRC rating because they have their protocols in place, and it's very expensive for them to change those in favor of one small batch order. And, you know, when we're talking about American companies using Chinese companies to put in orders, that's what happens. They do small batches in comparison to their regular advertised work, which they self-brand. Vice versa, American-made knives, you typically do get a higher Rockwell rating because they have smaller batches by default, and that's easier for them to control. They're not putting out knives in mass quantities like these Asian companies are, which actually allows them more flexibility for things like the Rockwell hardness. So I'm a little shocked, and I have a theory. My theory is that this might actually be the one that should be rated at 62 to 64, and this one should be rated at 62. That seems more plausible to me. The other option is, well, it's far less attractive, and that is that EDC may have asked for 62 to 64 on this Bestech version, but what are the odds that maybe they didn't test that? I don't know for certain. This is just a hunch of mine, but what are the odds that every other Bestech knife made in MagnaCut has a Rockwell hardness of 59 to 61, but magically they were able to get Bestech to do a small batch at 62 to 64? I'm not entirely convinced, and I would love to see someone do a Rockwell hardness test on an EMP Pulse version 1 to confirm, because I have my suspicions, and I just can't believe for 1 second that this is actually 62 to 64, given what I know about these Chinese OEM companies using steels like MagnaCut. With that big elephant out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about what I like in both of these, because there's actually quite a lot. With the Pulse version 1, the action it's perfect. And when I talk about the action, I'm not just talking about the force in which the blade deploys, which is actually rather good. It comes down to the button itself. One of the big issues people have with OTF knives is ease of actuation. It doesn't matter how hard it fires if you can't fire it in the first place, or if you go to hand your knife to someone that needs it and they can't fire it because they have essentially weak thumb muscles. Also, these knives are very fidgety by nature because people love to deploy and retract and deploy and retract, and they make this clacking sound, which is addictive. Once you get into OTFs, you start to realize that those things actually do matter to you, even if they may seem juvenile in the moment. I love the action on here. I love that the button's made out of titanium, and I also love that we have a 3D milled titanium pocket clip with regular Torx screws. That's great. I never suggest taking apart your OTF knife, but if you're a brave soul, go for it. Just be prepared to end up with a bucket of parts. And then here on the American-made version, it's always great to see things made in the USA. I have a feeling that EMP has had a lot of pressure to take their designs local, to have American-made knives. And who better to do an OTF knife than the country who is known for doing the best OTF knife work, and that is here in the United States. It is not, in fact, oops, see that? That was a fail. Hold on. All right, we're good. Who better to do the OTF knife than the country that's known for it? That's the United States. We have the best OTF knives in the world as far as I'm concerned, and I would challenge anybody to tell me a country that does OTF knives in general better than we do. This is our jam. And so naturally, it makes a lot of sense for EMP.EDC to take this design and go local. They could have gone with Kershaw. They could have gone with Hogue. Maybe they could have gone with Microtech. I doubt it. But they had options, and instead they went with Axial, which is a recent OTF company that was recently sued by Microtech for copying some of their designs, or at least that's what they claimed, allegedly. But Axial really made a name for themselves by starting out with a knife, an OTF knife that was very affordable, around $200. And then after they got their big boost initially, they went and did what? They made OTF knives that were pretty much in the same price line as Ultratechs. Now here's where I start to talk about things that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm going to shoot you guys straight. The Bestech version has better action. The Bestech version has better lockup. That is not sitting very well with me at all. You also just noticed that during my deployment and retraction of the American version, it actually lost its track. I have flicked these open many, many times, and I can tell you that's never happened on this Bestech version. You know what other knife it's never happened on? Is my SOS Knives OTF, which very much like this EMP Pulse version 1 has never, ever failed to deploy or retract. It's never lost its track. The action on this one is superb, and I can highly recommend it. If you want to check it out, I'll link to it up there in the corner. I will recommend this OTF for $100, 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. So why is it that the American-made version doesn't feel as well done as the Chinese-made version? I don't get it. I think part of it has to do with the capabilities. When we're talking about manufacturers like Bestech, Bestech has far greater manufacturing capabilities than a company like Axial, which is relatively new. What I don't understand is how hard we're leaning on the flag to get the job done, when we should be leaning on manufacturing prowess. And I don't know why they didn't go with a company like Hogue, when a company like Hogue actually has a wealth of experience in the OTF world. They might not be as popular as Microtech overall, but the quality of a Hogue OTF is undoubtedly very, very good. And I would actually argue to say that on the things that really make a difference for the user, things like the ability to use the button and the action and the lockup and the solidarity, I would actually argue that Hogue would have been a better OEM partner for them to go with. I'm not trying to say that this is a bad knife. It is absolutely not. Even though the fact that it did fail earlier in this video doesn't necessarily mean much. It could just be that it needs a good bit of lubricant spray and then to be air blown out. That's what you do when your OTF starts to lose its track and maybe the springs need to be refreshed, or, you know, maybe there's some debris in there, something like that. But I will say this. The button on here feels like you have to give it a lot to get it to actually deploy. Whereas on the Bestech version, you only have to really push this halfway and then it fires out. This feels crisper. This feels cleaner. And I really appreciate the opportunity to compare these at the same time, because if I was just doing this video one at a time, I could totally see how it'd be easy to overlook the differences between this one and this one. Ultimately, I think that for $270, this is a steal all day. You get premium quality MagnaCut, apparently, and you also get titanium on an OTF knife, which is very usable, very user-friendly, and very competent. In a one-on-one video against itself, the American-made Axial version of the EMP.EDC Pulse would probably come out as a pretty good option for someone that maybe doesn't want to buy a knife from Microtech. Maybe you don't like the styling of a Hogue and you really like the design cues of the Pulse. Then yeah, this would make sense. $325 seems a little steep to me for this knife specifically. In that price range, it's competing with Microtech Ultratechs and Hogue OTFs, which quite frankly have better action, better lockup, and better build quality. I'm not trying to dump all over this knife. I think that this should have been around $275, $280, but maybe making that happen while using an OEM just wasn't possible. What I'm curious to find out now is what your thoughts are. Did you buy either one of these? Did you buy both of these? Would you buy the other one if you only have one or the other? And what are your thoughts on my opinion about the MagnaCut Rockwell hardness? Let's have a conversation in the comment section down below. And if you want to watch more awesome knife and EDC content, go ahead and click on one of the videos that pops up next.